Hi, I'm Bruce.
And I'm Andrew. Today we're going to try to explain one of the Dispatcher Optimizer tool rules. If you'd like more general information about the DOT, check out the link in the description. We're going to try to keep these videos pretty short, focusing on a single rule at a time. This is our first video in the series. We'll be updating the DOT rules doc when more are available. Please stay tuned for more. So Bruce, what's the deal with ignore URL parameters?
Great question, Andrew. The ignore URL params rule is all about increasing the cache hit ratio of your site. I really wish the ignore URL params rule the name had been expanded a bit to state something like ignore URL parameters when considering if a request can be served from the cache. But of course, that's a bit too long. So really, it's about deciding which URL parameters should be allowed to pass through the dispatcher and count as a request on the published tier.
That's great. Do you have a demo?
I sure do. So for this demo setup, we're looking at, on the left-hand side of the screen, the dispatcher log on the top. On the bottom of this terminal window is the AEM publish request log. So if anything appears in this panel, that will indicate that a request has been counted as a cache miss and has reached the published tier. I have my dispatcher configuration on the right, and let's scroll down. So we're looking at a published farm, and we're looking at the cache configuration of that farm. If we scroll down in this section, through the rules and the invalidate section, through allowed clients, we'll find the ignore URL params rule. And out of the box, this configuration is configured in what I will call or describe as a deny list manner. So we are saying that essentially everything is denied from being ignored. So it's a roundabout way of saying it, but every query parameter will be allowed to be used and will count as a cache miss and reach the publish tier. In this case, we are essentially setting up any request that contains, or rather, any request that only contains the UTM campaign query parameter is being allowed to be ignored. And again, that's ignoring it when considering whether the cache can service this request. So if a request comes in with only the UTM campaign parameter, that query parameter will be ignored and the dispatcher would serve the requested page from the cache. So let's go into a demo. I will be using curl for this demo, and I have a cache that's already contains the usen.html page, and I'm using curl with the hyphen uppercase I, which just does a head request to just return the headers. But this will demonstrate what happens at the dispatcher level, just as well as a get request will. So I've received a 200 response, okay, from this request. And if we look in the dispatcher log, we'll see we're checking for a particular HTML file, in this case en.html. This page was allowed to be cached. I do have trace logging on, which is why there's this extra log output. And we'll see the cache action for this page was deliver. So this was delivered from the cache. It was counted as a cache hit. And this request declined means basically it was declined from passing all the way back to the published tier and simply served from the cache. That's great. Our request log on the published side did not have any entries added. There was nothing. Our published tier was completely unaware of this request occurring. Now let's change up this request a little bit, and we'll add a query parameter. So we'll say test equals 1, 2, 3. And we'll hit enter. And at this point, we will see something a little bit different happen. So now we have a log on the request, log appearing in request.log on the published tier. And we still got a 200 response. But basically, this indicates that this request passed through the dispatcher. And if we look in the dispatcher log, we can see why that was. So name not in ignored URL parameters, test. So because test was not specifically called out as being allowed to be ignored, it has passed through the dispatcher and resulted in additional request to the published tier.
Nice demo. That deny and allow ignore is a little confusing, so make sure if you're configuring this to kind of second guess yourself all the time. I always do. Does this really happen in the field? Well, what have we seen out there?
Yes, this can cause issues in the field. For example, if any request, such as a click on a Google ad, contains an unexpected query parameter, and this is done over hundreds or thousands of users in a short time period, this can cause lots of resource usage on the published tier, as all these requests coming in that could have otherwise been served just fine from the cache are causing a complete re-render of the resource or resources on the published tier.
Some people think that this idea and the dispatcher in general can be used as a security wall, since there are some things that a query parameter can be used for, but that isn't right, is it? Dispatcher is not a security wall.
No, the dispatcher is not a security wall and cannot replace proper security measures on the published tier. It's important to remember that.
That's very important. How does the DOT suggest that this property be properly configured to reduce the number of unexpected requests?
So the DOT suggests that you use an allow list as opposed to a deny list to only enable requests containing query parameters through the dispatcher which you are expecting and need on the published tier. Search terms are a good example of this. So let's work through another example. We'll return to my screen. Here are these terminals. And we're going to flip this rule such that instead of allowing all the query parameters through, we're going to set it up to essentially allow everything, all query parameters, to be ignored out of the box. And let's say we did want a search query parameter to be allowed through. We'll simply change the second rule. And of course, if there were other query parameters, we could add additional entries here, change the label, of course, and there will be additional query parameters that would be allowed through with that configuration. So when I do want to change this to be deny, so we're essentially denying or exempting this particular query parameter from being ignored. I'll hit save. I'll do one more thing. I need to restart my Apache instance. I can do so from another terminal that I have open. There we go. We saw some log output appear. Apache is restarted and it would reload my dispatcher configuration. And now, if I do a similar demo, but I change the query parameter that I'm using to search, and this may be my search term, I'm still requesting the resource is en.html, and I have a search term, and we will see, of course, that this did make its way back to the published tier because this is the one query parameter which I have allowed through. So this would be allowed to pass through to the published tier. The search results could be computed and returned to the user that way. As expected, we would see that the name is not in the ignoreUrlParams search. And if I return to my previous test of using a test query parameter, let's clear the request log, clear the dispatcher log as well, and issue this last request. Because test has not been denied from being ignored, we will see nothing happened on the published tier, and a different log entry appears here. Query string ignored, test 123. So this is how the dispatcher optimizer tool recommends that you optimally configure your ignoreUrlParams rule by first allowing star or everything to be ignored and denying specific query parameters from being ignored in this manner. Back to you, Andrew.
Okay, so basically the best practice is to ignore all parameters so they don't affect the cache at all, and then determine exactly which ones the server needs to get its job done, and then add those rules to not ignore those.
That's exactly right.
All right, that's all, folks. Hope you stay tuned for more DOT rule explainer videos coming soon.